What's up, Womack Nostalgia? Dave here in our podcast. What's going on in pop culture right now? This week, two very high-profile things, of course, to get into. Olivia Rodrigo's third album and Steven Spielberg's latest film, Disclosure Day. Additionally, I'm also going to talk about the new Riize album and the new action film, The Furious. So make sure you subscribe. YouTube.com/nostalgiapod. Linktree.com/nostalgiapod. See links below. Leave a comment. Let me know what is good, please. And let's get into it. What's up, Womack Nostalgia? Dave here with the review of Riize's second mini album 2. Riize, almost exactly 2 years into their run as a K-pop group at SM Entertainment. This is their third larger length project. There was some singles that came out a few months ago as well. Riize, of course, are following the storied lineage of male K-pop groups at SM Entertainment, following NCT and EXO. In fact, two of the members of Riize previously were in NCT. Riize, of course, a peer of Hearts to Hearts over at SM, and you know, it's hard to really call them like the first new male K-pop group at SM in a while because NCT continued to just add member after member and subunit after subunit. So a lot of asterisks there, but there's certainly been a lot of anticipation and hype for this group and what they can achieve. And I'd say to this point, Hearts to Hearts has definitely gotten more attention to this point, thanks to some higher highs, some more virality, etc. Riize's second mini album 2 definitely disappointed me. Sonically, this did not come across as an interesting, vocally forward project the way we'd expect from SM at their best. And it's also lacking a lot of catchiness or stickiness to its hooks, to its song structures, to make you want to revisit a lot of these tracks. And that's not that I think any of these songs are particularly bad. I think most of them sound pretty pleasant. They're conceived of fine. There's just nothing really taking them to the next level. In what's an increasingly common trend in K-pop right now, the title track Do Your Dance is less successful than a lot of these B-sides that are definitely stronger. There's definitely some obvious plays at social media virality with the chorus of Do Your Dance, which is intentionally catchy but in a really craven way. But on songs like Overdrive or Like a Bomb, I think the highs are much clearer. So yeah, a bit of a disappointment for me. It's just hard to connect with this one. With that first song, Soar, you know, I like the way the drums drop in the beginning. You have this guitar undercurrent there and this very energetic, chanty group vocals. The song does build some momentum, but then you kind of just have an okay chorus there. You know, I think the way the vocals swell pretty cool, but it sounds like a movie soundtrack to me. Not that interesting though, or particularly catchy. It's just kind of there. Verse 2, rap, it's all right, nothing special. I like the way the guitar ratchets up more towards the end, and there's a bit of vocal flair, some high notes on the outro, but just kind of a okay song. Do Your Dance with that drum tempo, with that bass, is much more in your face production wise, and definitely builds to a very fast paced, more breakbeat style quite quickly. That heads, hips, shoulders, toes hook, though, is so incredibly weak and so, again, obvious for its attempt to become a dance challenge online. Music should not be designed with that in mind, first and foremost. It's just uninteresting art. DD Done, definitely a clear dance beat once again. I like the way that beat subsides, though. You get some very smooth singing here, probably some of the smoothest on the whole album. Much catchier chorus here. I like the kick drum, it's pretty strong. And the verse 2, hip-hop, definitely fits the song the best compared to some of the other moments on the project. Overdrive, I like the synths on that production right away. I like the way the rap actually starts in the beginning. It feels more natural. Some nice vocal melodies here as well. It slows down in that pre-chorus though, and the chorus, you know, it's interesting because it's really just vocals at the start, but then the beat starts to really swell eventually, and ultimately it's a very glitzy song. Cool. I think there's a lot more going on with this one. And then Like a Bomb, this is clearly the best song to me. I think it just sounds the best. Like the way there's some kind of cool noises at the start with some horns. But the chorus is very lively. My only note with this one is the mix, I think, is a bit muddy in terms of the vocals and the production on the chorus. But overall, solid song. And then In a Loop, the closer. Chorus is perfectly fine. But yeah, I just think we're kind of lacking in like some like clear showstopper on this. And, you know, whether it's fair or not, they're on SM. They're supposed to be following EXO and NCT and all that came before, and I need you to stand out a little bit more than they do on this. It's weird, but I kind of got like, gosh, some Tomorrow Together vibes a little bit. Of course, different label, different ages, different style usually, but this kind of blended for me in a uninteresting, unremarkable way. But if you're a big Riize fan, let me know where you're at with this. What did you like? Did you disagree? What did you think was strong about this project? Either way, let me know. For more music reviews, more K-pop reviews, subscribe, and I'll see you next time. What's up, Mac Nostalgia? Dave here with the review of The Furious, the new Hong Kong action film from Kenji Tanigaki. This film previously premiered at Toronto last year and is now getting a pretty wide release here in the States. Notably an English co-production, this film previously premiered back at Toronto last fall, and Kenji Tanigaki, he has a pretty storied career as a action film choreographer. His early years worked very closely on numerous films with Donnie Yen. More recently, he was the action director for all those live-action Rurouni Kenshin films that most people saw on Netflix. He also did the action in Snake Eyes G.I. Joe Origins. And this film is actually co-produced with XYZ Films, of course, notably the producer behind the Raid films, largely held up as the greatest of the kung fu action films of the last 15 plus years at this point. This film stars Ji Mao, who is a Chinese action director most closely associated with his work with Jet Li, also featuring Joe Taslim, who most action fans will know quite well. Also memorably here is Yahan Ruyan, also famously from The Raid, and also Brian Lee, who's done a lot of action work. Kenji Tanigaki's The Furious is up there for some of the most creative yet punishingly brutal action fight sequences we've seen since The Raid. And that is not something I say lightly. There's been a lot of action film mimickers and copycats in the last 15 years. But The Furious is relentlessly entertaining and punishing and creative with sequences we've never seen before and featuring numerous actors who are among the best to ever do it. Structure-wise, plot-wise, the movie's very straightforward and familiar. Think Man of Fire, think Taken, think guy goes down the warpath to save his kidnapped daughter. You know the drill. But sequence after sequence, you're just absolutely riveted. Seeing this in a theater, there were numerous moments where the crowd energy was palpable. People were popping with delight at the ridiculousness and the high-level execution that they were watching unfold. Ji Mao and Joe Taslim are carrying every fight here, and then as numerous other actors show up, including familiar faces like Yahan Ruyan, the ante just keeps being raised in an incredibly entertaining manner. My biggest note about the movie is that it features some very obviously out-of-place English dialogue, which is present in addition to Mandarin and Tagalog dialogue as well. Some of this English dialogue is also very clearly overdubbed over someone speaking a different language, just completely unnecessary and kind of takes you out of it. There's a moment here or there where the CGI is a bit noticeable. This movie has a very modest budget, but for the most part, you don't mind because the action itself, that hand-to-hand energy, the flow of this movie is just so tactile and real that you can forgive a CGI moment here or there that's more artificial. Camera-wise, there actually are a few moments where it's hard to follow all of the action. The pace is actually that quick that sometimes we're a little too close to the action and it's hard to completely understand the breadth and the scope of what's being displayed. But truly, these are minor complaints. I think just kind of every sequence, whether it's the initial kidnapping and the extended truck fight, Ji Mao notably playing this mute. There's not a ton of characterization in the movie. Again, it's really besides the point to be super invested in these characters. You're just watching this for its spectacle. And I think that's probably something that maybe would hold us back from other movies that have similar degrees of action excellence, but have more under the hood with plot and writing and things like that. This movie's a bit more straightforward, but Ji Mao plays Wang Wei, whose daughter gets kidnapped. We really don't know anything about him, and his status as a mystery figure is true for everyone else in the movie interacts with him. But watching him seemingly outrun a moving truck was really funny. The film gives you a title card that it's taking place somewhere in Southeast Asia. It's intentionally very vague, and given all the faces and ethnicities you see on screen and the numerous languages you hear, it really comes across as a bit of a grab bag, but it's inoffensive as a result. But that truck sequence where we're first introduced to Brian Lee, who plays this seemingly unkillable large man, great stuff there. Another very memorable nightclub sequence here. First time you watch Ji Mao and Joe Taslim actually meet. They briefly do fight before realizing they're on the same side. Joe Taslim, we just saw him reprise his role of Sub-Zero in Mortal Kombat 2, but here in The Furious, it's a much more interesting role. He just has much more to do. You see his face. He's the second lead of the movie. And I think what was really cool about the movie is, as it's progressing and as the plot's going, you're watching sequences come up, you're watching plot progress, and you understand the beats as they're being portrayed. You understand what's coming. And, there's a subplot with the kidnapped daughter who kind of has an independence to her and wants to break herself out and save her newfound friends who've also been kidnapped, literally in a sex trafficking, child trafficking ring. And you think the movie's going to end a lot sooner than it ends up ending. And a big part of that is there's this really epic assault on the building where the kids are being contained, featuring this extended hallway fight. I've seen it compared to Park Chan-wook's Old Boy, but in this case, Wong is riding a motorcycle through a bunch of people. Throughout this movie, there's fairly brutal uses of a hammer as a weapon, by the way. Just the weight and the oomph behind the swinging of the blunt instrument there really comes across. But that hallway sequence into the staircase sequence, you watch Wong and Joe Taslim's Navin defend themselves with a wooden pallet as a shield. Just great stuff there. But the movie progresses and the kids get rescued and they're all taken in, and you think, oh, like, what else can happen? And that leads us to another level up in the movie for the final very extended sequence where at the police precinct where we think everything's concluding, the chief villain and his enforcer show up to wreck shop, and they kill numerous cops before they fight Wong and Navin. And that main villain, who's this kind of young businessman serving people above him, but getting involved in child trafficking to make his business partners money. He's definitely like a weaker character. He doesn't make a huge impression like as a character, as a villain, as a threat in the movie, but he holds his own in this fight sequence that he shows up to begin, and definitely makes his presence known. And as a result, he shows up with his enforcer character played by Yahan Ruyan, who of course is a very memorable part of the Raid movies, and his enforcer Tak is wielding a bow and arrow in a red jumpsuit, and he has deadly accuracy. And from there, we have what we think is a 4-way fight, but ends up becoming a 5-way fight because Brian Lee's character from Act 2 and 1 of the movie didn't actually die when we thought he would die, and comes back to life seeking his own revenge as kind of this, third entity in the fight, not really aligned with anyone there. And at that moment, when we realize there's 5 fighters, you get this picture-in-picture, kind of like out of an anime, out of a fighting game, card where we see all 5 faces on screen at once with this fun sound effect. And at that moment, there was like legitimate applause. It was just absolutely epic. And then what you get is this really crazy, extended, and brutal fight sequence. And again, I think just what you see displayed is just so original and so impressive. I think the fighting in this movie you could compare to the fighting in any action movie. I really believe that. Again, there's some simple aspects to the structure and the characterization of the movie that I wouldn't call this the greatest kung fu or action film ever, but the DNA of this being a Hong Kong actioner is as high level as it can get. There's also an incredible moment of surprise where one of the characters stabs someone close to him by accident. A true, like, holy F moment where you hear audible audience reaction. That's something that precludes that final fight that's so epic. I think if you're remotely an action fan, if you're remotely a fan of any kind of martial arts cinema, you have to see this movie. But yeah, let me know. What do you think of it? I mean, it has a modest start here in the States. It's doing better in China. I'm curious where it's going to levy out. But I think as people find this is clearly a cult classic. This is clearly one of the great action films of the 2020s. Certainly the best one of the year thus far. Let me know where you're at this movie. And for more movie reviews, subscribe. I'll see you next time. What's up, Welcome Back to Nostalgia. Dave here with a review of Disclosure Day, the new science fiction film from Steven Spielberg, starring Josh O'Connor and Emily Blunt. Other familiar faces here include Coleman Domingo, Wyatt Russell, Colin Firth. Steven Spielberg, 79 years young, still kicking it with his third movie of the 2020s following West Side Story and The Fabelmans. Disclosure Day, though, with its summer release, feels like the first Spielberg movie to come out without any kind of COVID angle and lens on its box office and its reception. And Disclosure Day represents the 5th time Steven Spielberg has done a movie involving aliens, following of course his classics Close Encounters of the Third Kind and E.T., and also War of the Worlds, and technically Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. And perhaps a little bit more under the radar, this is the first Spielberg movie since War of the Worlds, which came out in 2005, that is taking place in the present day. Obviously a fictional present day, but he largely reflects on the past in all of his movies. Steven Spielberg's Disclosure Day is a very cool movie that is inherently very Spielberg and also trying to serve multiple masters at once. I found this movie incredibly entertaining. Despite being an original sci-fi movie, I was quite riveted. I thought the movie did a great job with its tension, with its world building, and most crucially of all, has excellent performances at its center that help the movie move forward and land its key points, even if thematically some stuff lands better than others. The true star of the show here is Emily Blunt, with one of the best performances of her career. She's asked to do so much and communicate so much of the movie's pure sci-fi. This movie will polarize because I think some people will want this to lean harder into the paranoid thriller aspect of the movie setup and really get into the disclosure aspect of the world building, but Spielberg and screenwriter David Koepp simply have different ideas. This movie is much more interested in the humanity regarding its story and has a much bigger picture view of things. But it's worth diving into a lot of that because there's a lot of thematically ambitious things attempting to be addressed and reckoned with in this movie, and some of it's just so-so. I will say the action set pieces, when you get them in this movie, are quite compelling, quite riveting. The filmmaking and the camera work is very strong. And the movie's ending, those last 30 minutes in particular, do deliver a strong emotional response. I am rooting for this movie to do well just because original sci-fi is historically a more challenged, prospect at the box office, but it looks like it's going to do pretty well. And this is not a massive movie. It has like half the budget of the He-Man film, so it sounds like it's going to be pretty successful. And frankly, one of the highest grossing Spielberg movie since Ready Player One, I'd imagine, which was an IP movie of sorts. It sounds like this is going to reach a much larger audience than The Post or West Side Story or The Fabelmans. And West Side Story perhaps would have been a big hit, outside of COVID. We'll never know. But I think this movie is going to grab an audience, but I think there'll be a kind of disparate reaction to it. I'm very curious what the cinema score will be for this movie, in terms of those exits. But the initial setup of this movie, I think, is very compelling. We quickly get introduced to Josh O'Connor's Daniel Kellner character, a cybersecurity expert who has stolen classified information from this off-the-books government agency and plans to leak the information to the public one way or the other. It's not long before you kind of understand the Spielberg lens on all this story, right? Where Josh O'Connor's playing a whistleblower and representing a side of the story that doesn't believe and has distrust in the institutions supposedly safeguarding information that's too dangerous to release to the public. It's not hard to connect the dots to how that connects to our modern day and real life and whatnot. And of course, what is that information? It had to be spoiled in the trailers to market the movie. It would be nice if it was a bit more of a surprise, if this movie had more of like a festival launch and people got to learn what it was about in real time. But before long, you understand that it's about aliens. And we learn that there's been a, decades-long cover-up by the government to hide the existence of aliens on Earth, visiting Earth ever since, the 40s, ever since Roswell. And not only that, but there's actually been development of alien technology and interrogation and abuse of extraterrestrial species that have visited Earth. And it's a widespread, decades-long cover-up that has been so secret that it's actually above the president nowadays, where this secret agency, Wardex, is completely off the books and operating independently of the U.S. government and taxpayer dollars and things like that. And again, the paranoid thriller aspect of the movie and that build-up, I found that riveting. I thought all that setup was done tremendously. Again, I think it's just something that people have a lot of inherent interest in seeing, the exposing of and the realization of distrust in institutions. Colin Firth plays the movie's villain, the leader of Wardex, who's tasked with plugging this leak and retrieving this information before it gets exposed, because they have the firm belief that this information cannot be shared with the general public and it would just be too destructive to let this information get out. And as a result, there's kind of an ongoing chase and cat and mouse and whatnot to get the information back before it's too late. All these drives and things that have been stolen, including a magical alien MacGuffin device, one of 3 that we learn that Daniel has also stolen. And on the other side of the coin, we get introduced to Emily Blunt, who plays a weatherwoman, a meteorologist, Margaret, who is in Kansas City, and she, out of nowhere, seemingly develops the ability to speak multiple languages and read people's minds and understand everything about them simply by laying eyes on them. And this is very exasperating to her boyfriend, played by Wyatt Russell. And, before long, we get on this kind of crash course where the characters have to reunite. Everything kind of gets incited further when Margaret goes on TV to work and starts speaking in this clicking language that no one can understand. Seemingly this alien tongue. And before long, things start really ratcheting up. Josh O'Connor's Daniel was not the only one to, defect from Wardex. He had a bunch of other colleagues that all left at the same time. And their leader is actually played by Coleman Domingo's Hugo, who's, been planning this disclosure, if you will. And from there, we're kind of off to the races. I think the sci-fi of the movie, it's withheld from the audience a lot. And I think this is something that might frustrate people. I think Hugo, in particular, due to his paranoia, due to his desire to keep everything safe and succeed in their grand plan, against the government, he speaks very cryptically, gives very little information to Daniel and later to Margaret once they get into contact. And their overall end game is like hard to parse until it finally happens. You can start guessing, but the communication is just very abrupt a lot of the time. So it just kind of feels like we're kind of moving in disparate directions for a little bit. And Colin Firth and Noah and Wardex, they eventually decide to wield one of the alien devices themselves, the one that wasn't stolen. And we see the true use of its power, its abilities, so to speak. And there's a fearfulness of it. You can't touch it without a gloved hand. We see those consequences later on. Noah is basically able to use the device and look at and learn about someone remotely and basically kind of plug into their mind in a certain sense and material like appear in front of them and kind of control their will and act through them. And he does this with Daniel's girlfriend, Jane, played by Yu Hewson, who previously worked with Spielberg on Bridge of Spies. And I think that's some of the purest sci-fi you get in the movie. Those scenes are really tense and really cool. I think Firth, visually, the way he's able to act in those scenes, I think he does a really good job. And even Yu Hewson, her character, they set her up early on for you to really dislike her because she's gonna, through no fault of her own, really betray Daniel when she's being, used as like a vessel or whatever. But she does, I think, a pretty good job with handling a thankless role in many respects. Those sci-fi elements, though, I think are really cool. But it does speak to, I think, a lot of the higher-minded things that this movie introduces as it progresses, right? I think a lot of these thematic propositions and comments that the movie's trying to make, I think a lot of that ends up being more interesting than a lot of the plot that happens in the movie, because Jane, Daniel's girlfriend, she apparently used to be a nun, that we learn out. They originally go to a monastery or a church at some point. And the movie directly presents, if you're someone of strong faith, of a religious background, how would you act? What would your understanding of the universe be like if you were presented with undeniable proof that extraterrestrial life actually exists? I wish they tugged on that thread a lot more than they end up doing. I think they present it well, but they don't quite go there all the way. Additionally, I think the overall Wardex viewpoint of not wanting to release the information contrasted with, Josh O'Connor and Coleman Domingo, all of them, like their desire to release information at all costs because the public needs to know. I wish there was a bit more grappling with that as well, because I love the ending. I think the last 30 minutes in which, Margaret, after reuniting with everyone, Margaret basically gives the address and does the disclosure, basically leaks the information on public news to the world to get all the information out there. And I'll get back to that scene. But the concept that, and I think this kind of maybe a product of Spielberg being an older person, even David Koepp being an older person, like the prospect that like this would be something, the release of this information, this undeniable proof, the release of this information would like stop World War III, because that's the backdrop of this whole movie, is that like tension is very tough around the world. North Korea is seemingly about to antagonize and blow, kick things off and whatever. The notion that a news report of this, revelation of government conspiracy would somehow like stop global tensions and grab everyone's attention, that was a bit of a stretch for me. They show you multiple scenes of basically everyone in public like stopping what they're doing and watching their phones and watching this broadcast as, from Kansas City, they basically simulcast it out to CNN, ABC, BBC, every news agency in the world, right? I just don't think that would actually happen that way. I just think it was a bit unrealistic to think that many people, like basically like 99% of the world, would be captivated and stopped in their tracks to understand this type of thing. And the movie stops before actually grappling with any of that fallout. Could you compare that to how the House of Dynamite works? Maybe a little bit. Maybe that's a bit unfair. But I wanted a little bit more of that, frankly, because I think the movie takes you all the way to the end, takes you all the way to the precipice of what it's thinking about, makes you start thinking about it, and then stops. The movie ends. I really just don't think people would care to the degree they do in this movie. You just think about how real life works and how, frankly, uninformed the average person is about most things, right? This movie has a very optimistic view on people and the public and in society and things like that, and that's not new for Spielberg and the lens he has for a movie, but did feel a little hokey, a little idealistic, a little utopian for me. That being said, that last 30 minutes where you have Emily Blunt, kind of tee off the address, and we're contrasting a lot with all this archival footage of basically like, government footage, secret government footage of the discovery of spacecrafts, and then the confirmation of living aliens as well, not just bodies, and spacecraft flying away, all these various things over and over again. Watching that and seeing it alongside the CNN actor we see on the CNN news anchor on the screen, who's grappling with it in real time, just like the public. I thought those were absolutely riveting sequence. Like this riveting sequence of the imagery was incredibly, moving, and like I did have like an emotional response to those those moments, and I think like just the way it's staged and the way it's brought to you and just the way it continues to flow from footage to footage, and it's like it really makes you think about like how you would respond if like that level of conspiracy had happened. And again, that's what Spielberg was going for. I just don't think the actual real life takeaway would have everyone in the world react that exact same way is all. It's a movie, it's fine. But yeah, I love that sequence. I think a lot of the marketing shows some of those scenes. It shows the aliens, and some people might be disappointed it's not a pure alien movie, right? And he hasn't really done one of those except for War of the Worlds, I guess. But Close Encounters isn't really like that either, right? E.T., got the one alien, but it's more of a family adventure movie type thing. The movie's just a lot more high-minded and interested in other things than explaining, and really detailing a lot of that world building, a lot of that sci-fi. But like I thought the setup was so good and that archival footage was so compelling that I was like, I want to know like all that detail. Like I almost would like a movie like this movie if it was more pure paranoid thriller, more spycraft, more whistleblowery, right? It's like, what was being covered up? What was the government doing in the 40s and the 70s? Like, tell us all that stuff. Learn that. I think that's more interesting, and maybe that's more traditional, but I think that's more interesting than having Emily Blunt and Josh O'Connor develop these powers that they were given by the aliens when they visited Earth, and the aliens, appearing as animals to, comfort humans, but not actually being their real form. I think a lot of that stuff is a lot thinner, frankly. Josh O'Connor's gift, he has the ability to like process like binary and math and things, and he becomes this whiz, but he can't communicate with anyone because he's like so much different than everyone else following the gift that he received in childhood. But he's able to understand the clicking that Margaret, does on TV, and that kind of brings them together. They're like this dyad that comes together. And Hugo, Coleman Domingo's character, he's very like all knowing, but again, so withholding the whole time. So it's a cool movie. I think it's a really cool movie. It's ambitious for sure. I would have liked more grappling with belief with religion. I would have liked more of the fallout of the revelation. I mean, I would have liked a different spin on the movie that was more paranoid thriller and was getting into the realization of the scope of the cover up over time. I think a different version of the movie would work cool. That being said, for what this is, I still think it's cool. I still think it's broadly pretty successful, but definitely will not land with everyone the same way. Set piece wise and the car chases, the way those were filmed, and it's not like a groundbreaking car chase by any means, but very visceral, like very, very well done. It looked cool. A lot of the camera work from John Shkamiri really stands out as well. I mean, the transposing of images, the panning from mirrors and reflection and stuff. A lot of classic Spielberg shit on display. There's a train sequence with a train and a passenger car gets stuck beneath a train. That was particularly riveting. Probably the most original set piece, the biggest pop of all the set pieces you have there. I didn't mind the animal CGI. I know that was one thing that got a lot of negative attention when the trailer first came out. I thought it worked decently enough. I just didn't necessarily need those elements in the movie as much. But when you see the moment like when Margaret, Emily Blunt, in full command of her powers, and she's able to look at someone and communicate to them like a previous loved one and just see into their soul instantly. That was some like pure movie magic. That was kind of the essence of Spielberg face, right? The Amblin wonder, we think of. I thought that was genuinely thrilling, genuinely moving stuff. And you get the other side of that, right? Where Margaret doesn't even want to look anyone in the eye anymore because she doesn't want to know everything at all times. She wants to go back to normal. Again, I think Blunt does a great job. I think O'Connor's character is a bit more straightforward, but also he's on quite the run these days. He had an amazing 2025 and 2024. He's crushing. Colin Firth, again, I liked him in a more villainous role, and a character becomes more gray as the movie progresses as well. But yeah, Disclosure Day. Let me know, what'd you think of this movie? I know we're going to get tons of different reactions. What'd you think? What jumped out to you as most interesting about the movie? I think there's plenty to talk about with it, which is great. That's what we want, original movies. Speaking Spielberg, still got it. That much is clear. Him, like Ridley Scott, like Martin Scorsese, aging like fine wine, clearly. They're still crushing. Let me know where you're at with this movie. And for more film reviews, subscribe. And I'll see you next time. What's up, Well Mac Nostalgia? Dave here with a review of Olivia Rodrigo's third album, You Seem Pretty Sad for a Girl So in Love. It's been about 2.5 years since the last Olivia album, Guts, came out in the fall of 2023. Olivia Rodrigo at this point is very well established as one of the signature Gen Z artists we have in pop right now. I think if you take Olivia, put her next to Billie Eilish, like those are the two at the very top. Olivia specifically really building a massive fan base, becoming a regular arena touring artist off the strength of being a singer-songwriter. At this point, that breakthrough debut album, Sour, has 4 songs that are over 2 billion streams on Spotify. So he's truly massive. But this third album definitely represents a shift for Olivia in many respects. In the lead up to this album, she announced that she fired her old management team and kind of handpicked a new creative team to better support her moving forward. She's still working with Dan Nigro as her chief producer and co-writer and collaborator when it comes to the music. But this album definitely represents an aesthetic shift as well. Gone are the one-word album titles, gone is the purple in the album art. But most notable of all is the very stark genre shift compared to Olivia's first 2 records. Olivia Rodrigo's third album, You Seem Pretty Sad for a Girl So in Love, stands out for its stark differences compared to her first 2 albums. Gone is the 90s pop punk sound that brought her so much attention when she debuted. In its place, we're going back a bit further to early 80s new wave. Despite this clear sonic shift, the Olivia Rodrigo brand of stellar songwriting is still very much here. She's just giving it to us with a different coat of paint, something that's speaking to her more as she's entering her mid-20s. The storytelling of this album is pretty clear with two distinct halves. Olivia has a unique ability to speak to romance and speak to coming of age, and there's just a personality that really comes out in her lyrics. She's definitely cursing a little bit less here, but when she does curse, they are very impactful moments. There are numerous lyrics throughout the album that are very memorable. Between that second single, The Cure, and new album cut, You and Me Equals Love, very memorable lines. But I can't help but hear a song like My Way and wish Olivia stuck to the more rock-leaning sound of her past. She's simply so good at it. My Way is a complete banger and makes me long for that version of her. And I do expect her to get back to that at some point. If there's any resounding takeaway with this album, it's definitely a lyrics-forward album because vocally it's often much quieter, much softer. It's much more balladly forward and ballady centric than her previous albums were, where the previous album, the biggest highlights of them largely were not ballads, but there were still ballads throughout the rest of the album. This time, the ballads are definitely the point, and a song like My Way, despite my love of it, sounds out of place compared to the rest of the album, just sonically, just energy-wise. It's just not like most of the other songs. The first song was also the first single, Drop Dead, and of course that song, when it came out a few weeks ago, a month and a half ago, a clear signal that, oh wait, this is a different type of Olivia album, at least sonically. And, I think the swelling of the vocals on the chorus kind of bring the song forward, but it was definitely a different sound. I think it's definitely a bit of a grower track for me. Verse 2, you have this kind of pitter-patter to her vocals, something that's a little bit new for her, but it's a more understated affectation, and you hear versions of that throughout a lot of this album. Track 2, Stupid Song, you have these quieter vocals, once again from Olivia, over some keys. I like the way it builds to its second verse, get these faster drums, this noticeable, guitar strumming. The song, though, really comes alive on the bridge there with these even faster vocals. The guitar really picks up, these like pure elation shouting moments, definitely like kind of an instrumental jam in those moments, and a little bit of vocal breakdown as well. Structure wise, there are some cool moments like that throughout this album where the songs kind of evolve or like take a step forward sonically as they go through the runtime. Track 3, Honeybee, definitely one of the, I think, lyrical highlights, vocal highlights. It's definitely quiet again. It's nearly whispering at the start from Olivia over some twinkly piano, but it builds to these doubled vocals and eventually concludes with even more vocal layers, with background vocal layers as well. Maggots for Brains, this one stood out to me because it's like a big jolt of energy, and I wrote down in my notes finally, just because I was really hoping to have the album kind of wake up a little bit. Not that those earlier songs don't have strong elements to them. I think the writing, the storytelling, the setting up of the album's arc is well established at that point, but Maggots for Brains kind of picks us up and moves us forward energy-wise as well. And it's a bit of a synth bop, honestly, right away. I love the tempo on it. I think the chorus is a bit loud in the sense that I don't love the vocal mix. I wish Olivia's vocals popped a little bit more, but I do really enjoy the verses with this song. I think it's a very nice groove. You Plus Me Equals Love, another jam, quick drum tempo. Vocally, though, Olivia is restrained once again. It's a funny contrast because instrumentally, it's still very much like a jam session. One of the best lyrics on the whole album is here. They say modern love's a cruel endeavor, and to that I say fuck it, whatever. Kind of a classic, Olivia-ism, you could say. She has, I think, again, there's just a personal bend to the way she writes about stuff and reflects on things, speaks on her own experience. I think a lot of people just find really relatable and really endearing. As I mentioned, I love My Way. It's a song that catches you right away with this kind of squeaky electronic line, but the vocals to me are just so much more interesting here. And I think the chorus vocal performance in particular really stands out to me. I got a little bit of Avril Lavigne here. Olivia herself spoke to this as kind of Gwen Stefani inspired, and she called it like the only angry song on the album. I love the punk energy from Olivia because she's been so good at it, right? What do you think of, obviously, Good For You off the first album, but I loved All American Bitch off the second album. Even a song like Getting Back has a little bit of that energy as well. I think she's really good at that, and she kind of was the paragon, the flag waver of the punk and, throwback rock elements coming back to pop music in the early 2020s. She, of course, was the poster child for that in a certain sense. And I understand her wanting to move forward, or maybe that sound is not speaking to her in this moment. She said a lot about that already. I just hope that she's able to weave in that energy level a little bit more in her future music, just because it's such an obvious strength, and combining that sound with her still very sharp pen, just fireworks. The next track, Purple, of course, a meta title. I like the drums on this, kind of like a breakbeat tempo. Keys in the backgrounds also stand out. You have the track The Cure, of course, the second single. This single definitely landed immediately better for me than Drop Dead. I think Drop Dead works great as an intro for the setup of the album, but as a lead single, it didn't immediately grab me the way The Cure did. I love the acoustic strumming. I think the songwriting here is just really paramount. On the chorus in particular, it's really strong. Another song with a very precise and sharp use of a curse word from Olivia here. Used to play a game in my head when I date a guy, tally up the girls that he fucked till I start to cry. I mean, those are heavy lyrics, straight up. Begged was a quiet one for me. Following that up, you have What's Wrong With Me, which is featuring Robert Smith of The Cure. Olivia, of course, performed with Robert Smith at Glastonbury last fall. They've clearly developed a creative partnership and friendship. I think they're just kind of like similar spirits, it appears. They actually debuted this track a few weeks ago, or last week, at Barcelona's Primavera Sound Festival. And Olivia in general, she's definitely really endeared herself to a lot of the kind of old guard in rock and pop music, doing stuff with the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame a few years back. She definitely has a lot of fans from the earlier generations. That much is pretty clear. Less is a pure piano ballad. It's really all Olivia's vocals, all songwriting. Expectations, at this point, we're towards the end of the album. This one really grabbed me in a welcome way, because the drums are back. It's an energetic chorus. I think verse 2, that vocal delivery in particular, is very reminiscent of early Olivia, that more sarcastic, matter-of-fact, sardonic tone she used to do. That was a cool track for sure. And then lastly, Cigarette Smoke, more acoustic, has this vocal build, has this, kind of triumphant, last gasp climax moment to it at the end. But yeah, still a really cool album. I think there's not a lot of artists in pop, especially artists as young as she is still. She's still only just turned 23 a few months ago, which is crazy. There's not a lot of artists in pop that make albums that feel so considered. I compare her to Billie because they're similar ages. Lorde comes to mind. Of course, there's the myriad comparisons to Taylor Swift, that Olivia gets. And, I don't think Taylor's really made an album with this type of genre sound, that's for sure. Taylor's not done a lot of the punk stuff either, give or take reputation, I guess. But Olivia's, I think, out of that shadow and has been for some time. And now I think we look to people like Gracie Abrams, my beloved Holly Humbert Stone. I think those are the people that have to get out of the Taylor Swift shadow now, where Olivia has done that successfully, I think you can say. But yeah, Olivia Rodrigo's third album. You seem pretty sad for a girl so in love. Quite the mouthful of a title, but let me know, what did you think of this album? How would you compare it to Olivia's previous records? What do you think of the new sound? What's your favorite song? Let me know. And for more music reviews, more pop reviews, subscribe, and I'll see you next time. All right, that's going to do it for the pod this week. Next week, Toy Story 5 from Pixar will be here. A lot to get into with that. Looking forward to it. House of the Dragon, also returning for season 3 on HBO. I'm also excited to see The Death of Robin Hood from A24, and new music from YG, Tierra Whack, Hearts to Hearts. So make sure you subscribe. YouTube.com/nostalgiapod, Linktree.com/nostalgiapod. Leave a comment. Let me know it's good. And I'll see you next week.